G'day, welcome to Lunch Money. You are live with the online and social media home for special situations, workouts and capital raising professionals. My name is Nick Samios. I'm the fund manager and director here at Hermes Capital, and I am your podcast and live stream host. So a very warm welcome to you. Today we're going to talk about reputation management, communications, stakeholder communications, partly in a restructuring scenario, but also when there's other major events in a business where you've got messaging out amongst your stakeholders, employees, suppliers, customers, and how we manage those things, so that when you're trying to restructure a business, or when you're trying to go from point A to point B, whatever the nature of the transition might be, you've got all your stakeholders marching along by your side so you can hit your objective, and everybody, and so it's about messaging and et cetera, et cetera. So we've got two experts joining us. We've got Holly Reynolds, who's a communications expert from left field, and Shane Deane who's a restructuring expert from Deane & Co. Before I introduce them, just regular housekeeping. If you're watching live, you can ask us a question, and whoever asks the best questions, ask a decent question, and I'll send you the Lunch Money mug. We'll post that to you if you ask a good question. The other thing I'd ask you to do is, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, and subscribe to our podcast on Apple or Google or whatever your favorite podcasting platform might be. Okay, that done, I will introduce our first guest today, who is Holly Reynolds. G'day, Holly. How are you?
Good, Nick. Great to be here.
Fantastic. It's really great to have you along. It's you've got a very sort of specific skill set. We don't often talk about this area in our live stream, so it's really good to have someone with a different angle. Now, Holly, you are a communications expert. You do a lot in property development, construction, but also business generally with corporate communications and public relations. Now, your business is left field communications. Tell us, what is it that keeps someone like you busy?
Well, we're fortunate we've got a lot of things that keep us busy, Nick. As you said, we specialise in property development and construction, and we do a lot of work with clients fundamentally to establish and maintain and sometimes repair their reputation. And that comes in many forms. So we deal with the media on a daily basis in different ways. We might be launching property projects for clients. We might be making announcements for them. We might be managing issues for them. And this week, for example, we've been working on some great community engagement programs as well for some terrific clients that have brilliant projects that have a lot of social good involved in them. So it's really diverse, the work that we do, but at the heart of it, we are about building those reputations, maintaining them, and really looking after them and being our client's champion.
So yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit about reputation repair, but it's also, you're much at the front of that in terms of building a reputation in the first place. What are the sort of issues that you get called in to assist with in the property development area? The sort of things that might go wrong that you get called in to help smooth over.
Yeah, look, they can be issues around potential construction issues on projects, and there might be something that's potentially a big legal issue. We might be called in on that to help with the messaging and getting that right and understanding the stakeholders and who we need to deal with. We get involved really when there's a lot of change in the business as well. So if there's acquisitions or disposals, we get involved in that to manage the messaging. And we also did work, in fact, on one of the biggest issues the industry's faced in quite a while. We were working on the issues in crisis management for the Opal Tower scenario of a couple of years ago. So that was sort of a once in a career situation, and it's probably the ultimate kind of crisis that we see and would want to see regularly, I have to say.
And so with that Opal Tower, I mean, who were you communicating with? Obviously, there's the owners of the building. I mean, who are the targets for your communications?
Look, that was a really interesting one because, of course, there was the developer involved in that and the builder, and both we were brought in with the developer, but worked alongside the builder in a way as well. So we had obviously the residents and the owners were critical to be communicating with, but we also had the political overlay. There was a lot of interaction with the state government, and there was a lot of interaction with the media on a daily basis, of course. But above and beyond that, a range of key stakeholders, existing partners, other suppliers, financiers, the list runs long. So it was a very busy time.
I don't want to. I don't want to get into a rabbit hole that takes up the next 3 hours because I'm sure the next question I could. But I wonder. Once upon a time, you had press releases, but now, now there's YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all that sort of thing. So, is a press release still a thing? I mean, or is it?
It's so funny you mentioned that because I just had this conversation yesterday with another contact of mine, and it is still a thing. But in ongoing, in live crisis situations, daily media briefings, calls, and emails to media are the done thing. But press releases, we do them day in, day out. So yeah, very, very important tool of the trade still.
Yeah, I guess once upon a time, you do the press release and it was in the news and you sort of deal with the news cycle day to day. But these days, of course, someone can jump on, I don't know, Instagram or Facebook and make a comment and the whole thing's gone to hell in the next 5 minutes. So, but look, we won't. We as I say, that's a whole topic. I'm personally fascinated by it, but we'll just put you back in the waiting room for now, and we'll introduce our next guest. And our next guest is Shane Deane. Shane, g'day Shane, how are you?
Good, Nick, and yourself?
Fantastic. Now Shane's an insolvency and turnaround specialist, registered liquidator. He's with Deane & Co. Insolvency Practitioners. Now you are a refugee, or I don't know, what do we call it? You're in Sydney now, but you're on the run from Melbourne.
I think visitor to Sydney's the nice term, but lockdown dodger is probably the other term that I just heard.
Yeah. Well, you're broadcasting from a certain location now because I think that there's people looking for you as we speak. But
exactly.
Now, when I sort of first spoke to you about asking you to come on the podcast, I thought that we would talk about comms and Safe Harbour. But of course, when we prepped for this earlier in the week, Safe Harbour really is under the radar, and so I guess the comms aspect of it isn't such a challenge. But having said that, I did want to just quickly talk. You were involved in a pretty large Safe Harbour recently.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we were the Safe Harbour advisors on the Roger Davis stores situation, which ended up unfortunately went into voluntary administration, but the result was that the directors achieved protection via the Safe Harbour legislation, and ultimately went into a deed of company arrangement, which provided a very good return to creditors. But it was something that we always had an eye on in terms of when was the exit for the directors, because you can only go so far under Safe Harbour before you'll be falling foul of the legislation, which is when's it reasonably likely to achieve a better outcome, and that reasonable likelihood is going to get further and further away the longer you go.
Now, I do talk to some people and they say, "Oh, Safe Harbour's not working. There's no Safe Harbour." But of course, the whole point of Safe Harbour is that it's not something you've got to print in the papers or issue notices about. It is meant to be, behind. It's not something you have to announce. So, do you think there's a lot more of it than what we think, or what? I mean, obviously, you've been involved in some. I mean, is there a lot of it going on?
Yeah, mate. Look, I think there is a lot more than what people think. Definitely, it's not a disclosed process, as you said, but it's deliberately designed that way. So, and Holly was talking about reputation and brand and things like that. So, when you go into voluntary administration, immediately you're sort of disclosing to the world that you've got an external administrator appointed, they're running the business, and it does affect brand. And in quite a number of cases, brand is valuable, especially when it's been a long-standing brand. And if you're talking about part of your strategy might be to sell that brand as part of a makeup, then preserving the value in that brand is imperative. So having that Safe Harbour run in the background is very helpful. It protects the directors. It also allows non-executive directors to not get cold feet and want to sort of either jump off the board or appoint administrators to avoid any insolvent trading process. So that gives them some comfort. It also means that you don't lose that expertise of the non-execs because otherwise they'll leave. So you manage to preserve a very good board, and you'll manage to hold on to that brand, hold on to that reputation, and then, if necessary, communicate with the people that are key to making sure some of the plans that you've got in terms of that Safe Harbour turnaround engagement can come off or have the best chance of coming off without necessitating a formal appointment.
Yeah, I guess that's the whole thing, isn't it? And one of the biggest issues that anybody has in trying to save a business is people usually, that you get to it too late because they didn't put their hand up early enough. And the reason they didn't put their hand up early enough was because they were worried about their reputation. They were worried about saving face. And obviously Safe Harbour is meant to be a mechanism where you can get some early intervention and hopefully save the business, but it obviously doesn't always turn out that way. But having said that, you do have to, you've got to sometimes face the music, and then it does become a messaging exercise. So with that, Shane, I think we will bring Holly back. Okay, so look, I thought that there's a couple of aspects to what I wanted to talk about today. One is managing the stakeholders and communicating with the stakeholders. Another one is, having got through the crisis, then managing the reputation moving forward. But I thought maybe we could start off with my little doodle, if we could put that up. And I have a sketch here. I've said before, over Christmas I did a little sketching course, and I'm going to use it, damn it. So I've got this little diagram of who's involved in a restructure, and it could be a formal restructure or informal, whatever it might be. You've got customers. You need the customers to not abandon you, because obviously for obvious reasons. You've got your suppliers. You don't want your suppliers stopping supply. You've got your bank. You certainly don't want the bank or your financiers to pull the pin on you. You've got your employees. You need your employees turning up. And I think Holly's probably going to tell us that your employees are, many of them are customer facing, and you need them to be messaging with the outside world as well. And of course, there's the regulators, the ATO, FEG and ASIC, who are keeping an eye on you as well. So I guess I'll ask you first, Shane, having a look at all those stakeholders. I mean, let's start with, say, with the supplier. Well, what's the biggest challenge when you've got to deal with stakeholders? Is it the suppliers? Is it the employees? Who's the?
Yeah, look, mate, it varies from business to business. Is the reality of it. And I'll give you an example of a VA that we did pre-pandemic, which was we went in, the business couldn't operate, but it had massive orders from customers, but the customers were a little bit sort of offside because they hadn't been getting supply on a regular basis. The reason they weren't getting supply is because the suppliers weren't supplying the company. And that was a combination of inability to pay, non-communication. So we went in there as voluntary administrators, spoke to the secured creditor. The secured creditor was prepared to support us to get the supply term back on. We spoke to the suppliers. They were prepared to do it on a new account with us as voluntary administrators. Then we communicate with all the customers saying, are your orders still good? They say yes. And we converted 1.3 million bucks of WIP over 3 weeks, kept the employees on. And we were just upfront with the employees. We said, look, we've only got this WIP here to complete. At the end of that 3 weeks, your employment will be terminated, but once we get through that process. So we didn't have any employees walk on us. They all stayed, got the WIP done. The customers.
Now, I'll just hold you up there, because there's just probably come to jargon bingo. You're saying WIP. Now, of course, Holly and I know what WIP is. It's work in progress. But a lot of people don't know. What you're saying is that when you got involved, you had a whole lot of work in progress. I guess an order book, you might say, that was in various stages of completion, and you needed to complete that. So that's what you're talking about there.
That's right.
Holly, so having heard that, as I know that we've been talking about employees, and I guess the employees are really communicating with those other stakeholder groups, aren't they? With the customers and with the suppliers. I mean, it's one thing for Shane to talk about talking to the suppliers, but at the end of the day, it's the employees who take delivery of the orders and maybe putting the orders through. Tell us about situations where you're trying to get the messaging through the employees.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is that, we were discussing this earlier, that it is so important to communicate fundamentally, because in the vacuum of information, people make things up, and that's where things really can go sideways. And particularly when you've got front-facing or public-facing employees that have to deal with customers or suppliers or so forth, you need to empower them with enough information so they feel comfortable that they can deal with any questions that might come to them, and they can do that in a fairly authentic way. So it's really understanding what the message is that you can empower them with. But fundamentally, we've got to remember that when you're going through any kind of change like this, the heart of an employee is, everyone in the chain, really, every stakeholder wants to know what's in it for me, or how's it going to affect me. And if you can give them some sense of certainty and explain to them what's happening, as Shane's outlined, you're going to win some trust there, and they're going to be the ones that can be the ambassadors for you on your front line and really help you get through that period. So, having good, what we call internal communication or employee communication, needs to be where it really begins, I would say.
So I guess what you get involved a lot in construction, right? So where you have issues on a job site, the last thing you need is all the employees walking off site. And the trouble is, you've got multiple subcontractors there, right? So a job site isn't just one employer. There's the electrical company, there's the steel guys, there's the concrete guys, and I imagine, Shane, that your client that you're dealing with might be the concreter. But of course, those guys are talking to the other businesses on site. And have you had those sort of situations where where you've had employees walk off, and how do you get them back?
Yeah, they had some situations where employees have been non-supportive of the business, and in most cases it was just because they'd had an absolute enough of where the situation was. Or there's alternative options available for them. The other thing too is that when you're explaining to the employees, if it's in a voluntary administration scenario and you're talking to them about ongoing work and what that may look like in the future, the initial period you're saying, look, we're going to get through this next 4 weeks, and then hopefully after that there'll be a deed of company arrangement put in place, and that was when it will go forward from there. They don't really find a lot of comfort sometimes in that. And if you've got a robust job market, you may lose them fairly quickly. And they might be picked up. Quite often they get picked up by the developer themselves or by the builder themselves to complete the work on site. And then the builder severs the relationship with the company. But the relationships are in those situations are already very toxic or very sour, and it's an opportunity to say that's enough.
So Holly, what's the actual process? I mean, how do what's the process for deciding what the message is? And then, then what's the next process to get that message into the employees? Because as you said, you're turning the employees into ambassadors, both for their suppliers and the other tradies, say on a job site, if that's what it is. And so what's the process? I mean, I guess you got to come up with a message and then deliver the message.
Well, it's really understanding where we're at in the process and what's actually going on. So if there is, I'm going to give you an example here of, say, it's more an acquisition sort of situation. So a company buying another company out, and you've got obviously internal communications that you need to work out, but you need to explain how that's going to happen. But you need to know exactly where you're at in that process. And as Shane would know, it's very much case by case, and it depends on where you're at, how far down the path you're at. And I always advocate being as transparent as possible, as quickly as possible. And even though being able to say, look, we've just got to get through the next 4 weeks, it doesn't feel good to anyone. It's often the best you can do in that situation. And, you know, you mentioned earlier, Nick, when it comes to reputation, often it's about what you've done before you need to really think about managing these comms. It's about how you do treat people in the lead up to it. And hopefully you've built some good trust, and there's a good culture there, that there's an understanding that you're doing the best you can in the circumstance as well. But in terms of working out that message, you really do need in that room all the key advisors that you would need, and work through what's practical to be communicating right now, what's the best way to keep people feeling as positive as possible without gilding the lily, you know, being as transparent as we can, and how do we progress that? Because one message doesn't hold. One message will hold for a time, but you need to evolve that message. So it's very much a live situation.
I guess, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned, I guess, mergers and acquisitions, really, because you know, where you have, I mean, it's one thing where we're talking about a business turnaround or a reconstruction, whatever it might be, but in a merger scenario, you know, often, particularly if you've got a larger company taking over a smaller company, you know, people are worried about their jobs, and, you know, they're saying, well, you know, they've got 20 salespeople and we've got 15 salespeople. They don't need 35 salespeople, you know, that sort of thing. So I guess you've got the employees worried about whether or not they're going to have a job, that sort of thing.
Yeah. But definitely in a you know, in a VA situation specifically, again, you know, I've a couple of times been around boardrooms for weekends with you know, the accountants and the barristers and the solicitors, and, you know, all the key advisors to actually work out, well, what is our plan? And now we have our plan, what is the communication around that? So that's what really guides the message, is where we're going from here, what's the pathway, and then understanding those key stakeholders and what matters most to each of those stakeholders. And then you need to tailor that message so that it resonates for them, and it's not just white noise, or it's not just too motherhoody and they go, oh yeah, what, I don't believe it. So that's the other thing, is actually being able to land the message with integrity, or you know, so that they can take hold of that and feel that there's truth in it. Because, you know, as you guys know, when there's any kind of conflict or change, you know, that's water cooler fodder. So you want to try and minimise that and manage the narrative as much as possible.
Yeah, I know in transport businesses, for example, you know, you've got the drivers of the trucks, you know, they're seeing the customers and you know, they're making a delivery and then they're bad-mouthing the company. And I don't know, I've only got 4, they've told me I've got 4 weeks, you know, I'm out of here, I'm looking for a job, or those, you know, those so-and-sos. But is it a matter of, let's say it's a transport business, for argument's sake, I mean, are you getting them into a room and giving them a presentation? What's the...
So it can vary in different situations that we've done. We've had face-to-face meetings. We've nominated people in the team to go and manage certain stakeholders because they have existing relationships. So it's actually understanding who your champions are at the moment, in that moment, and being able to empower them to go and be the advocate and go, okay, I need to talk to you about this. Let's do this. So we might do an information session, and you know, there might be email comms that we'll issue as well in terms of direct contact. And then there's a face-to-face, just one-on-one discussions that happen well. And I think that's the important thing, is that, you know, it is the existing stakeholders and those good relationships that you've got as well that you need to shore up. It's not just the people that will be necessarily affected by it, such as the employees. And Nick, your beautiful cartoon maps that out really, really nicely, that there are so many other people in this puzzle to hold close and keep that communication flowing. Because if something does go wrong, and we've also talked that sometimes it's through no fault of someone's, that something has happened, someone becomes in the crosshairs, and so very much it's about talking to those advocates that they've already got, the people that know them, know what they're about, know what their character is, and that really is fundamental to how you can get through these things. And actually, if you have to, then repair a damaged reputation as well.
All right, well, we'll get onto that in a moment. We'll just move on to that in a sec. I just wanted to ask Shane, what's the role of the owners in this? I mean, have you ever had a situation, Shane, where you think that, look, we can get a good message out there and we can get all the stakeholders on board, but the owners of the business are the obstacle?
Yeah, they can be the obstacle, absolutely. They can be sort of very helpful, or they can be an absolute obstacle. So we've had a number of scenarios where they don't want to engage with, whether it be the staff, and it's usually the staff or the employees of the company, or they don't want to basically be on message. They effectively hide behind the appointee, which is not a good process, especially when you're talking about a VA that's going to go towards a deed, because you're going to put them back into the driver's chair. So it's best that they take a level of control and a level of understanding, obviously with the oversight of the voluntary administrators and under our control, but at least they can step up, have some proper messaging to the employees, even if it means that they've got to swallow some pride, because what we usually find is they've promised the world and delivered nothing. And the reason they promise the world is they think if they keep selling the upside that they won't lose their employees. And the opposite's true in most instances, whereas if they just told them the absolute truth and where they were at truly, they would have a little bit more respect from the employees back towards them, and they'd probably work better for them as a team, as opposed to more of a, well, you've kept me in the dark, now why am I going to work for you? So, which we've got to take into account when we're looking at a restructure as to how that's going to play out on the other side. And then you look at the makeup of the board, and it may be that you need to promote someone off the floor, or bring someone into a more powerful position that has a good rapport with the employees to make sure that the company can continue to survive, despite some of the messaging that come from the directors in the first place.
Well, I think it's interesting. I know I've seen myself scenarios. It comes down to a question of leadership, and I guess that's a whole different discussion. But I've seen the CEO of the business, almost taking the side of the employees in terms of messaging and griping and complaining about what's going on. And I said, listen, buddy, you need to act like a leader. You're the one that's got to rally these troops. You don't need to be sitting around the water cooler complaining and woe is me with them. But that's another story. I will say it's interesting. I mean, again, we can have a great discussion around Christine Holgate. She's taken on that role at Toll, and Allegro have got her involved there. I think that could be a masterstroke. I mean, obviously she's someone who's got strong communication skills, and so I guess that sort of talks a little bit to what you're saying there, Shane. You've got an acquisition scenario, and you're going to put someone in the chair who's going to make a bit of a splash. So Holly, let's talk about reputation repair. So I guess that, you've got a business, whatever the scenario might be. It might be a business that's gone through a restructure. It might be a developer that's had some issues with a particular site. Talk us about that process of reputation repair.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say about that is, this stuff can really hurt on a deep emotional level, right? So, and I've been on the front line and had a front row seat to see on a number of occasions where it's really taken a big personal toll. So the first thing I would say is you really need to, if you're faced with this kind of situation, you need to try and separate the logic from the emotion. It's so critical in terms of then being able to plot a pathway out, because if you're guided by emotion the whole time, you're going to be wanting to get onto Facebook and reply to the messages and get into some online battle, and you're going to want to shoot from the hip. A lot of people do. So the first thing is to try and take some steam out of it. And then you really consider what the true situation is. And one thing I wanted to mention is that obviously the media plays a big role in the damage that can be brought to a reputation or wrought upon a reputation. And, with the greatest of respect to my colleagues in the media and past friends and current, they don't always get it right. but they're not always necessarily defamatory either. So it's very hard to prove that. And I've known a few people that have tried to go down that path, again, fueled by this emotional need to right the wrong. But I think we need to put the media aside in one sense and say the things you can control in repairing your reputation is the content you can create for yourself and the channels that you can control. And the media is not a channel that you can control. You can influence it, you can work at that, you can get someone like me in there to help you. But the reality is it's not the platform to fight the fight. So really, when it comes to it, it's really looking at the landscape and saying, what's the true damage here? What do I need to rebuild? And who is in my corner? So start with your supporters. Think about the relationships you already have and the people that really know you. And I touched on this earlier. They're the ones that are going to help rebuild confidence and rebuild the word of mouth, which is so critical in actually repairing a damaged reputation. So that Nick, is really where I'd start.
Okay, well, that's I've just had a comment here from Bill Guthrie, who's an old colleague of mine. And Bill, we had a Guthrie electrical truck out the front of our office recently. But he's saying that in an SME, if you don't have the right people on side before you go in, extremely difficult to keep your people working to make money, and you need good support. I was lucky to have the right people to assist. Thank you very much for that comment, Bill. So I guess that's what Holly's saying. But the other thing that you're saying, Holly, is that it was interesting. You're sort of almost going into a deeper level there with the individual in terms of not being angry. It's very easy to get on social media and bang out the replies. I suppose you've probably had situations where you've worked hard to get a message right, and then someone's got off the leash and ruined it with a couple of tweets or Facebook replies. Shane, do you have in your restructuring? I mean, have you ever had to deal with social media? Social media firestorms. Roger David, for example.
Yeah, no, look, not at all on the Roger David stuff. That obviously there was a lot of press about it going into voluntary administration, obviously, but the voluntary administrators dealt with that, and they also dealt with the deed. So, but for the most part, that was a pretty good news story off a bad result in terms of it had to go into voluntary administration. But yeah, there's always the odd loose cannon in some of these restructuring programs where people will put out tweets or they might put out a Facebook post, and that's probably why you won't find many insolvency practitioners with social media outlets.
Yeah, I can understand that. I probably get a little bit too much social media myself, but it's a bit of an addiction.
Nick, I was just going to say on the social media front, what we found last year in 2020 was that we had a lot more. So certainly also in the wake of Opal Tower, we've seen a lot of builders and developers really understanding the importance of building reputation and building trust. And so we've seen a lot more go onto social media and really start to populate that content in the last 12 months, really. And that stuff is actually critical. So on one hand, while social media can be really dicey, if you can really use it to help build up that library or history of positive content as well.
Well, yeah, we were talking about. I had a friend who got into a little bit of trouble, and his story made the major papers, and so every time you Googled his name, bang, the first thing that came up was this nasty story. But you're saying that one way of dealing with that is to make sure you got lots of good content ongoing.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. We've worked with, we've been called into situations where we've worked with a client that has an extraordinarily low profile, for example, very private. And there are a lot of people in this industry that really prefer to operate that way. Do what they're good at, don't need to thump their chest and tell the world how great they are. However, in a couple of situations that we've worked on, it's really worked against them, because when these stories have happened, and they've happened and they've gone big, and I'm talking front page of Sydney Morning Herald stuff. So when that happens, and Finn and the Australian, the whole thing, and TV. When it goes big like that, and you're Googling, you want to find out more about that person or that company. You Google it, and if they're the only things they can find, they've got nothing positive to counteract the news and for people to consider, well, hang on a minute, they've been doing some really good stuff and this person's actually really decent. They've won all these awards. They must be really good at this. So what's going on here? So just, and even when we've looked at, possibly floating more positive news to the top, if there's no positive news there at all, there's no way you can budge those negative headlines off the search results.
Right. So this is when you're talking about trying to get some news that's already, on social media somewhere to try and float it up. But if it's not there in the first place,
social and mainstream as well.
And mainstream,
mainstream. Yeah.
So I guess you would argue that's part of the ongoing role of PR is to make sure that you are getting stories into the mainstream as well. Because I guess if if I'm watching, if I see an article, see something on TV, and I Google the person's name, and the only thing that comes up are the 2 or 3 articles about whatever the latest disaster is and nothing else, that defines that. That's the whole definition of that person.
That's the story told. And it's tough. And even, being able to use your own channels, your own website, to be that source document, I suppose, is good. But having third-party articles or being able to find more information on you in different places, that is positive and does shine light on the, those great things that you've done or you've been known for, just as important, and more so.
So maybe someone like Shane, we were talking earlier that because you and I, Shane, deal in corporate restructuring, sometimes things don't turn out well, and of course everybody wants to blame you or me. So maybe you should be on the socials, making sure there's plenty of good stories out there, so that when someone does Google you on something, they can see that So maybe there's an element of that as well.
Consult after, Shane.
I guess the other thing is, Holly, I'm thinking about just sort of tying back to what we were talking about before with employees. Is part of it. I mean, part of the messaging, getting an article in the paper, for example, is about communicating with the outside world. But is that also, to some extent, part of your strategy for dealing with the employees as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think your gentleman that commented before was talking about, if you don't have your employees on board when something goes pear-shaped, then you don't have any hope. Similarly, employees need to read about we'll read about what's going on in the traditional media, but being able to engage them in a way, build up the content that they're going to be proud of, is really important. It's about giving them a sense that they're working for a decent organisation, that I'm going to stick in here. They're doing the right thing by me. I'm going to do the right thing by them. So the employee piece is really critical. I'm just thinking of another situation, Nick, where we had a situation where we had some delays in construction on a project, and we needed to let, obviously, the buyers know. But we needed to empower the frontline staff, so the customer service staff, to really understand what was going on there. And they were just getting inundated with calls, people wanting to know what's happening. And delays in construction, they happen every day of the week for a variety of reasons. So it's, but again, without empowering those employees to be able to at least have a conversation, not feel awkward and uncomfortable, that is incredibly important. And that, if you give them the tools so they can do the job they have to do, they're going to be much more inclined you're going to be much more able to keep their trust, and they're going to be helping you through whatever process it is that you have to go through.
Okay. Well, that's, I guess, Shane, it's interesting because I called this podcast, I think I use the term words and numbers. I guess, as a restructuring person, you do have a lot of statutory obligations and a lot of reports, and they have to be presented in a special way. But on the other hand, I guess that there is this marketing, to some extent, spin or whatever it might be, that can play an important role as well. All right. Well, look, we are going.
Spin, Nick, not spin. spin.
Not spin.
We're not in the
sorry.
business of spin. Come on, gentlemen.
Just facts. Just the facts.
Just the facts. Just the facts.
All right. Well, look, Shane, we'll just sort of wrap up. Any sort of closing thoughts from you, Shane?
No, mate. We're just sort of on exactly what you said. Then, like for us, the numbers are the numbers, but it's how we present those numbers and the messaging between your own staff and obviously the staff of the current company that we're looking after, and to the wider stakeholder group, is as important in terms of a restructuring position as the numbers that you're faced with, because you can work with the numbers and they are what they are, but the messaging is very important.
Yeah.
Okay. Holly?
Look, business at the end of the day for me is all about relationships. And yes, it's the numbers, and I get the numbers, but managing those relationships through good communication will help you rise from the ashes, or, go into your second or third act or whatever it needs to be. Understanding the importance of behaving well throughout whatever process you're going through, I think is something to bear in mind. And, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and there is another chance, and that's the most important thing, is putting yourself in a position that if something does go catastrophically wrong, it's not the end for you.
It's interesting, Holly. You might agree with my assertion that I make, not glibly, but I just wonder whether or not, and sometimes in business, you're better off studying Shakespeare and history rather than getting a business degree sometimes, because it is all about people and relationships and communications, isn't it? I mean, we can learn how to do the numbers and all of that sort of stuff, but understanding relationships is very important. All right. Well, look, I'd like to thank you both. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, Shane. I hope that they don't catch up with you, the people looking for you, the lockdown police. And it's been great having you, Holly. It's wonderful to get that angle and those different points of view. So very much appreciated. To our viewers, if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. And if you're listening to us on a podcast, how about you go and give us a rating? That'd be great. Fantastic. 5 stars, of course. All right. Thank you very much. Take it easy. Cheers.